The fine arrived on a Thursday morning in January, taped to my garage door like some kind of scarlet letter, and that was when I knew my peaceful existence in Maple Ridge Estates was officially over. I had been living in this planned community outside of Columbus, Ohio, for 3 years, and up until that moment, I had managed to fly under the radar of our homeowners association. Sure, I got the occasional passive-aggressive newsletter about keeping lawns trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches, or the reminder that basketball hoops were strictly forbidden on driveways. But I had never been personally targeted. My name is Jack Edwards. I am 42 years old and I work as a software engineer from home. My life is pretty simple. I keep to myself. I do not throw wild parties, and I certainly do not go out of my way to cause trouble. But apparently, storing my trash and recycling containers against the side of my house during winter was a cardinal sin worthy of a $300 fine. I ripped the notice off the garage door and read it again, certain I had misunderstood something. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead, with that ridiculous little logo of a maple tree and a picket fence. It stated that I was in violation of Section 12.7 of the Community Covenants, which required all waste receptacles to be stored either inside a garage or behind a privacy fence at least 6 feet tall. My containers were visible from the street, positioned on the concrete pad beside my garage, and therefore constituted an aesthetic violation. The kicker was that I had been storing them there every winter for 3 years. The reason was simple and practical. My garage was already packed with my car, my workbench, my tools, and all the other equipment that actually needed protection from the elements. The trash and recycling bins were designed to be outside. They were literally made of heavy-duty plastic meant to withstand weather. Dragging them in and out of my garage every week was absurd. I called the HOA management office immediately. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Maple Ridge Estates, HOA. This is Brenda speaking. Hi, Brenda. This is Jack Edwards from 4523 Willow Creek Drive. I just received a fine for $300 regarding my trash container placement. Oh yes, Mr. Edwards, we have your file right here. The violation was reported by our board president during her neighborhood inspection last Tuesday. Neighborhood inspection. I tried to keep my voice level. Look, I have been keeping my bins there for 3 years. Why is this suddenly a problem? Sir, ignorance of the rules does not constitute an exemption from them. The covenants are very clear about receptacle storage. I understand that, but $300 seems excessive for something that does not actually harm anyone. The bins are neat, they are not overflowing, and they are on my own property. The fine structure is outlined in Section 19 of the governing documents. First-time violations of aesthetic standards carry a $300 penalty. If you do not remedy the situation within 10 days, you will receive an additional fine of $500. I took a deep breath. Can I at least speak with the board president about this? Maybe we can work something out. Mrs. Patricia Henderson is available by appointment only. However, I can tell you that she is quite firm about enforcement. She believes that lax standards lead to decreased property values. I would still like to request a meeting. Brenda sighed, as if I was inconveniencing her tremendously. I will pass along your request. Someone will contact you within 5 to 7 business days. I hung up feeling frustrated and more than a little indignant. $300 for having trash cans in the wrong spot seemed like highway robbery, especially when the HOA dues I paid every month were supposedly covering the cost of maintaining common areas and handling actual community needs. Over the next few days, I did what any reasonable person would do. I researched. I pulled up the complete set of HOA covenants, all 67 pages of dense legal text, and read through them carefully. Section 12.7 did indeed state the rule about receptacles, though it had clearly been written by someone who had never actually lived in a real house with real storage limitations. The section made no allowances for practicality, or for the simple fact that not everyone had a massive garage with unlimited space. I also discovered something interesting. Section 12.7 had been amended 2 years ago. The original language had been much more relaxed, allowing containers to be stored on side yards as long as they were not visible from the front of the property. Someone had pushed through a much stricter version, and when I checked the board meeting minutes, I found that the change had been spearheaded by none other than Patricia Henderson herself. Patricia Henderson. The name kept coming up. She had been elected board president 4 years ago, and had apparently made it her personal mission to transform Maple Ridge Estates into some kind of suburban utopia, where every blade of grass was identical, and every house looked like it had been stamped out of the same cookie-cutter mold. By the following Tuesday, I still had not heard back about my meeting request. I decided to move the containers to avoid the additional $500 fine. The problem was that I did not have a privacy fence, and installing one would cost several $1,000s. The only other option was to somehow fit the bins inside my garage. I spent an entire Saturday reorganizing my garage. I built shelves along one wall to stack boxes vertically. I mounted my bikes on wall hooks, and I even donated a bunch of old equipment to Goodwill. By the end of the day, I had managed to clear just enough floor space to fit the trash and recycling bins along the back wall. It was cramped and annoying, but technically compliant. On Sunday morning, I received an email from the HOA. Patricia Henderson had agreed to meet with me on Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock at the community clubhouse. I replied immediately to confirm. Wednesday arrived, and I drove the half-mile to the clubhouse, a bland brick building that housed a small gym, a meeting room, and an office for the property management company. Patricia Henderson was already there when I arrived, seated at the head of a long conference table with a stack of file folders in front of her. She was exactly what I had imagined. Mid-50s, perfectly styled blonde hair, a crisp navy blazer, and an expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. She did not stand when I entered, just gestured to a chair across from her. "Mr. Edwards, I am Patricia Henderson, board president. I understand you wanted to discuss your recent violation." I sat down. "Yes, thank you for meeting with me. I have already moved the containers into my garage to comply with the rule, but I wanted to discuss the fine itself." $300 seemed steep for something that was essentially a minor aesthetic issue. Patricia folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Edwards, the fine structure exists for a reason. If we do not enforce our standards consistently, the entire community suffers. Property values decline when neighborhoods look unkempt. I understand the importance of standards, but my containers were not creating an unkempt appearance. They were clean, organized, and barely visible from the street. Barely visible is still visible. The rule is clear." The rule was changed 2 years ago to be much stricter than the original version. I have lived here for 3 years and had no issues until now. Patricia's expression hardened. Previous lax enforcement does not establish a precedent. "I have made it a priority to ensure that all residents comply fully with our covenants. Maple Ridge Estates is a premium community, and we must maintain those standards. So there is no possibility of reducing or waiving the fine. None whatsoever. In fact, Mr. Edwards, I would advise you to carefully review all of the community covenants. During my inspection, I noted several other potential issues with your property that could result in additional violations if not addressed. Other issues. Like what? She opened one of the folders and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of my house, clearly taken from the street. Your mailbox post has some rust spots. Section 8.3 requires all fixtures to be maintained in good repair. Your front door wreath is not a neutral color, which violates Section 9.1 regarding exterior decorations. And your driveway has some oil stains that need to be cleaned under Section 7.4. I stared at the photograph, feeling a surge of anger. You are seriously threatening me with fines over a wreath and some rust. I am not threatening you, Mr. Edwards. I am informing you of potential violations so that you can address them proactively. This is actually a courtesy. A courtesy. I stood up, not trusting myself to stay calm if I remained seated. Mrs. Henderson, I pay $1,400 a year in HOA dues. I follow the rules. I am a good neighbor. This kind of petty harassment is exactly what gives homeowners associations a bad reputation. If you find our standards too demanding, Mr. Edwards, perhaps Maple Ridge Estates is not the right community for you. That was when I realized that reasoning with Patricia Henderson was pointless. She was not interested in fairness or common sense. She was interested in power and control. I thanked her curtly for her time and left the clubhouse, fuming. Over the next week, I paid the $300 fine online, not because I thought it was justified, but because I did not want to deal with additional penalties or legal action. I also bought a can of rust-resistant spray paint and touched up my mailbox, replaced my colorful wreath with a plain green one, and pressure washed my driveway until it looked brand new. I was determined not to give Patricia Henderson any excuse to fine me again. But the more I thought about the situation, the more it bothered me. Patricia Henderson was not just enforcing rules. She was using them as a weapon. I started asking around the neighborhood, talking to other residents I occasionally saw while checking the mail or taking out the trash. What I discovered was disturbing. Tom Granger, who lived 2 streets over, had been fined $500 for planting a vegetable garden in his backyard because it was visible from a neighbor's second-story window and violated the landscaping aesthetic rules. Sharon Mills had been fined repeatedly for having a trampoline in her yard, even though her kids used it constantly, and it was positioned behind her house. Another neighbor, Mike Patterson, had been slapped with $1,000 in fines for repainting his shutters a shade of gray that was not on the pre-approved color list, even though the difference was barely perceptible. Every single one of these residents had the same story. Patricia Henderson had personally conducted the inspection that led to their fine, and every single one of them had been told that the fines were non-negotiable. I also learned something else. Patricia Henderson lived in the largest house in the development, a sprawling 2-story colonial at the end of Oak Hill Court, and her property had its own peculiarities. She had a decorative fountain in her front yard that ran constantly, a clear violation of the water conservation guidelines in Section 14.2. She also had a massive detached shed that was painted barn red, which did not appear on the approved color list, and arguably violated the same aesthetic standards she enforced so ruthlessly against everyone else. But of course, no one dared to report her. She controlled the board, she controlled the fines, and she had made it clear that crossing her would result in relentless scrutiny. February rolled into March, and I tried to put the whole mess behind me. I focused on my work, stayed out of HOA business, and avoided any situation that might draw Patricia Henderson's attention. Then the snow started melting, and I made a decision that I had been putting off all winter. I decided to get new trash and recycling containers. The ones provided by the city were old and banged up, and I figured that, if I was going to have to haul them in and out of my garage every week, I might as well upgrade to something with better wheels and handles. I ordered 3 large containers online. One for trash, one for recycling, and one for yard waste, since spring cleanup was coming and I wanted to be prepared. They arrived on a Tuesday. Big, sturdy, dark green containers with smooth rolling wheels and ergonomic handles. I was actually pretty pleased with them. That evening, I rolled all 3 containers into my garage and lined them up along the back wall, proud of how organized everything looked. On Wednesday morning, another fine appeared on my garage door. This one was for $400. The violation: unapproved receptacles. According to Section 12.8, all waste containers had to be the standard issue bins provided by the city. Private containers were not permitted unless they were identical in size, shape, and color to the city-issued versions. I almost laughed. It was so absurd that it felt like a joke. But there was the fine, printed on official letterhead, signed by Patricia Henderson herself. I called the management office again. Brenda answered, sounding even less enthusiastic than last time. "Brenda, this is Jack Edwards again. I just got another fine, this time for having the wrong trash containers." "Yes, Mr. Edwards, I see the violation here. You will need to replace the containers with approved versions and pay the fine within 10 days. "Brenda, the containers are inside my garage." How did Patricia Henderson even know I had them? There was a pause. "I am not privy to the details of inspections, Mr. Edwards. Did she go into my garage? You would need to take that up with Mrs. Henderson directly. Put her on the phone. She is not available at the moment." I hung up and immediately checked my garage. The side door, which I rarely locked, was closed but unlocked as usual. I looked around carefully, trying to determine if anyone had been inside. Everything looked normal, but the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Patricia Henderson had walked onto my property and entered my garage without permission. That was trespassing. I pulled up the non-emergency number for the Columbus Police Department and explained the situation. The officer who took my call was polite, but not particularly helpful. "Sir, if you did not have any locks on the door and there is no evidence of forced entry or theft, it is going to be very difficult to prove trespassing. Do you have security cameras?" "No, I do not." "Then I would recommend installing some and keeping your doors locked. If it happens again, you will have evidence." I thanked him and hung up. He was right. I needed cameras. I ordered a complete security system that same day, complete with cameras covering the front door, back door, driveway, and garage. They arrived 2 days later, and I spent a whole Saturday installing them and setting up the monitoring app on my phone in the meantime. I returned the new containers and dug out the old city-issued bins from where I had stored them in my basement. I put them back in the garage and paid the $400 fine online, seething the entire time. $700. That was how much Patricia Henderson's petty tyranny had cost me so far, but I was not the only one paying. A few days later, I ran into Tom Granger at the grocery store. He looked exhausted. "Hey Tom, how have you been?" He shook his head. "Honestly, Jack, not great. The HOA fined me again last week. Apparently my lawn has some weeds and that is a violation. Another $300. That is ridiculous. Tell me about it." "I am seriously considering selling and getting out of here. My wife and I are tired of being harassed. Have you thought about running for the board or getting Patricia voted out?" Tom laughed bitterly. "You cannot vote her out. The board elections are a joke." She controls who gets on the ballot, and she has a couple of cronies who rubber stamp everything she does. Unless you can get a majority of homeowners to show up and vote, which never happens, she is untouchable. That conversation stuck with me. The system was rigged, and Patricia Henderson knew it. She could do whatever she wanted, fine whoever she wanted, and no one could stop her. April arrived, and with it came the first trash pickup day of the month. I hauled my bins out to the curb the night before, just like I had done 100 times. The truck came early in the morning, and I heard the familiar sound of the hydraulic lift collecting the bins. Everything seemed normal. Then, that afternoon, I found another notice on my door. This time, it was not a fine. It was a warning. According to the notice, I had placed my containers at the curb more than 12 hours before pickup time, which violated Section 12.6. The rule stated that bins could only be placed at the curb after 6 a.m. on the day of pickup. I had put them out at 10 p.m. the night before. The warning stated that any future violations would result in a $250 fine. I could not believe it. I had been putting my bins out the night before for 3 years. Everyone in the neighborhood did the same thing. It was common sense. The trucks came early, sometimes as early as 6:30, and if you did not put your bins out the night before, you risked missing the pickup. But apparently, common sense did not matter to Patricia Henderson. I decided to test something. The next trash day, I set my alarm for 5:45 a.m., dragged myself out of bed, and hauled the bins to the curb at exactly 6 a.m. Then I watched from my window. At 6:20, Patricia Henderson drove slowly down my street in her silver Lexus. She stopped in front of my house, took a photograph of my bins with her phone, and then continued down the street. She was actively hunting for violations. That was when I realized something important. Patricia Henderson did not just conduct occasional inspections. She was patrolling the neighborhood constantly, looking for any excuse to issue fines. It was not about maintaining standards. It was about control and, I suspected, about the money. The HOA collected thousands of dollars in fines every month, and while the funds were supposed to go toward community improvements, I had never seen any significant projects completed in the years I had lived there. I started paying closer attention to the HOA's finances. The monthly newsletters included a brief summary of the budget, but the details were vague. I requested a full financial report, which was my right as a homeowner. The management company dragged their feet, but eventually, I received a packet of documents in the mail. What I found was illuminating. The HOA collected approximately $400,000 annually in dues from the 300 homes in the community. On top of that, they collected nearly $80,000 in fines and penalties. The expenses were listed in broad categories, but when I dug into the details, several things stood out. First, the management company was paid $60,000 a year, which seemed high for a community our size. Second, there was a line item for $25,000 in administrative consulting fees paid to a company called Prestige Property Solutions. A quick online search revealed that Prestige Property Solutions was owned by Patricia Henderson's husband. Third, there was almost no money being spent on actual community improvements. The landscaping budget was minimal, the clubhouse was in disrepair, and the playground equipment was old and rusty. The HOA was basically a money-making scheme, and Patricia Henderson was at the center of it. I printed out the financial documents and started making calls. I contacted every neighbor I knew who had been fined, and I invited them to my house for a meeting. About 15 people showed up, and we spent 2 hours talking about our experiences. The stories were infuriating. Some people had been fined multiple times for the same supposed violation, even after correcting it. Others had been issued fines for things that were not even violations, like having a package visible on their porch for more than 24 hours, which was not actually mentioned anywhere in the covenants. "We need to do something," Sharon Mills said. "This has been going on for too long." "What can we do?" Mike Patterson asked. "She controls the board. We force a special election," I said. "According to the bylaws, if 10% of homeowners sign a petition, we can call for a special meeting and vote to remove the board. Do you think we can get 10%? Tom Granger asked. "We have 300 homes. We need 30 signatures. There are 15 of us here. If each of us gets 2 more people to sign, we will have it." We spent the next week going door to door. It was harder than I expected. A lot of people were afraid of retaliation. They had heard the stories and they did not want to become Patricia Henderson's next target. But slowly, we gathered signatures. By the end of the week, we had 32. I submitted the petition to the management company, along with a formal request for a special meeting. Brenda called me 2 days later. "Mr. Edwards, I received your petition. However, Mrs. Henderson is disputing its validity. She claims that several of the signatures are not from registered homeowners. Every single person who signed that petition is a homeowner in this community." I verified it myself. "Mrs. Henderson is requesting that you provide proof of ownership for each signer. That is absurd. You have records of who owns property here." "Nevertheless, that is her position. If you cannot provide proof, the petition will be denied." I spent another week gathering proof. I knocked on doors again, asking people for copies of their deeds or mortgage statements. Most people were cooperative, but a few had moved on and did not want to be involved anymore. In the end, I compiled documentation for 28 signatures, just shy of the 30 I needed. I was frustrated but not defeated. I decided to try a different approach. I filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Real Estate Commission, outlining the financial irregularities and the conflict of interest with Prestige Property Solutions. I also sent a certified letter to the HOA's attorney, notifying them of potential violations of state HOA laws. Then I waited. While I waited, trash day came around again. I was meticulous about following the rules. I put my bins out at exactly 6 a.m. They were the correct city-issued bins. They were clean and properly maintained. There was no possible reason for a violation, but Patricia Henderson found one anyway. This time, the fine was for improper placement. According to the notice, my bins were positioned 3 inches over the property line, extending onto the public sidewalk. This violated city ordinances and reflected poorly on the community. The fine was $350. I measured the placement myself. The bins were entirely on my property, a full 6 inches from the sidewalk. I took photographs and submitted them along with a formal dispute of the fine. The dispute was denied. According to Brenda, Patricia Henderson had personally measured the placement and confirmed the violation. Her measurements took precedence. I was now over $1,000 in fines, all for violations that were either trivial, fabricated, or both. I was angry, but I was also starting to formulate a plan. Patricia Henderson had a weakness. She was obsessed with rules and order, but she was also careless. She had walked onto my property without permission, and now I had cameras to prove it if she did it again. She had used her position to funnel money to her husband's company, which was a clear conflict of interest. And she had been selectively enforcing rules, targeting certain homeowners while ignoring violations by others. I just needed to catch her in the act. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. In late April, the city announced a change to the trash pickup schedule. Due to budget constraints, pickups would now occur every other week instead of weekly. To accommodate the increased volume, residents were encouraged to use larger bins and to separate recyclables more carefully. I did not think much of it at first. I adjusted my routine and made sure to follow the new schedule. But then I realized something. The change in schedule meant that trash would accumulate for longer periods, which meant that bins would be fuller and heavier. For people with larger families or those who generated more waste, a single bin might not be enough. The solution was obvious. Use additional bins. But according to Section 12.8, only city-issued bins were allowed, and the city only provided one trash bin and one recycling bin per household. If you needed more, you had to purchase them privately, and those private bins had to be identical to the city versions. I ordered 2 additional city-issued bins directly from the waste management company. They were expensive, but they were identical in every way to the ones I already had. I placed them in my garage, neatly lined up with the others. 2 days later, another fine appeared on my door. This one was for $500. The violation: excessive waste generation. According to Section 12.9, homeowners were limited to 1 trash bin and 1 recycling bin per pickup. Additional bins were not permitted unless approved in writing by the HOA board. I had never heard of Section 12.9. I pulled up the covenants and searched for it. It was not there. I checked the amendments. Still nothing. I called Brenda. There is no Section 12.9 in the covenants. Mrs. Henderson added it as an emergency amendment last month. It was necessary to address concerns about waste management under the new city schedule. Amendments require a board vote and homeowner notification. I never received any notice. The notice was included in the April newsletter. I pulled up the April newsletter. There was no mention of any amendment. I took a screenshot and emailed it to Brenda, copying the HOA attorney and the management company's regional supervisor. This time, I got a response within an hour. The regional supervisor, a man named David Chen, called me directly. "Mr. Edwards, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I have reviewed the situation and you are correct. There was no proper notification of the amendment. The fine will be reversed. Thank you. I appreciate that. However, I need to be candid with you. Mrs. Henderson has been difficult to work with. She has been issuing fines without proper authorization and making unilateral decisions that should require board approval. Unfortunately, my company does not have the authority to remove her. That has to come from the homeowners. I tried to organize a special election, but she blocked it. I am aware. I saw the petition. If you can get 30 valid signatures again, I will personally ensure that the meeting happens. Mrs. Henderson does not have the authority to deny a properly submitted petition." "What about the financial issues? The payments to her husband's company?" David sighed. "That is a legal matter. If you believe there is fraud or embezzlement, you need to file a complaint with the appropriate authorities." I already filed a complaint with the Real Estate Commission. "That is a good start. I would also recommend consulting with an attorney. If there is evidence of financial misconduct, you may have grounds for a lawsuit." I thanked David and hung up. I was making progress, but it was slow. Meanwhile, Patricia Henderson was still in power, still issuing fines, and still making life miserable for everyone in the neighborhood. Then something happened that changed everything. In early May, the city changed the trash pickup route. Instead of coming down Willow Creek Drive from the north and exiting onto Maple Street, the truck now entered from Maple Street and exited onto Oak Hill Court. Oak Hill Court was where Patricia Henderson lived. The new route meant that the trash truck had to navigate a tight turn onto Oak Hill Court. and the street was narrower than the others in the neighborhood. To make the turn, the truck needed clear access to both sides of the street. Patricia Henderson had always put her bins out on the south side of her driveway, right at the edge of the street. With the new route, that placement was directly in the path of the truck's turn. The driver had to maneuver carefully to avoid hitting the bins, and on the first week of the new route, he knocked one of her bins over, spilling trash across the street. Patricia was livid. She called the waste management company and demanded that the driver be disciplined. She also sent an angry email to the city council, complaining about the route change and insisting that it be reversed. The city, unsurprisingly, ignored her. That was when I had an idea. The next trash day, I put my bins out at exactly 6 a.m., just like I was supposed to. But instead of placing them at the curb in front of my house, I moved them to the curb directly across from Patricia Henderson's driveway on Oak Hill Court. It was technically legal. The curb was public property, and there was no rule about where on the curb you could place your bins as long as they were in front of a property you owned or had access to. Oak Hill Court was part of the same HOA, and the street was maintained by the community. The placement was strategic. With my bins on one side of the street and Patricia's bins on the other, the trash truck had almost no room to make the turn. The driver would have to stop, move the bins manually, make the turn, and then replace the bins. It added several minutes to his route and was a significant inconvenience. The first week, the truck came through and the driver did exactly what I expected. He stopped, moved my bins, made the turn, and continued on. I watched from my car, parked a block away, and smiled. The second week, Patricia noticed. I was not there to see it, but I heard about it from Tom Granger, who lived on Oak Hill Court. According to Tom, Patricia came storming out of her house at 6:30 in the morning, furious that someone had placed bins on the curb near her house. She took photographs and marched back inside. By noon, I had a new fine. This one was for $400. The violation: improper bin placement. According to the notice, bins had to be placed in front of the homeowner's own property, not elsewhere in the community. I submitted a formal dispute, attaching a copy of the relevant city ordinance that explicitly allowed bins to be placed on any public curb within the municipality. I also noted that there was no HOA rule prohibiting the placement, and that the curb on Oak Hill Court was public property maintained by the city, not the HOA. The dispute was denied, but this time I had leverage. David Chen, the regional supervisor, had told me to reach out if there were any more issues. I forwarded him the fine and my dispute, along with the city ordinance. He called me the next day. "Mr. Edwards, this fine is completely invalid. There is no basis for it in the covenants or city law. I will be instructing the management company to reverse it and to issue a formal warning to Mrs. Henderson about improper fine issuance." "Thank you, David. I appreciate your help. I also want you to know that I have been conducting my own review of the HOA's finances. Based on what I have found, I am recommending that the management company terminate its contract with Maple Ridge Estates. The level of irregularity and the lack of proper oversight make it impossible for us to continue in good faith." "What does that mean for the community?" "It means that the HOA will need to find a new management company, or the homeowners will need to take over management themselves. Either way, it is going to force a reckoning." I thanked him again and hung up, feeling a sense of satisfaction. Things were finally starting to move in the right direction. But I was not done yet. The next trash day, I placed my bins on Oak Hill Court again. This time, I added an extra touch. I borrowed bins from Tom Granger and Mike Patterson, who were happy to help. In total, I placed 6 bins on the curb across from Patricia Henderson's driveway, creating an even bigger obstacle for the trash truck. The driver was not pleased, but he managed to navigate around them. Patricia, however, was apoplectic. According to Tom, she spent 20 minutes on the phone with the waste management company, screaming at them to do something about the bins. The company politely informed her that the bins were legally placed and that there was nothing they could do. Patricia then called the police, claiming that the bins were creating a traffic hazard. An officer showed up, took a look at the situation, and told her that the bins were not violating any laws. He suggested that she take it up with the HOA. That was when Patricia made her biggest mistake. She decided to move the bins herself. I was not there when it happened, but my security cameras caught the whole thing. At around 7 p.m., Patricia drove over to Oak Hill Court in her Lexus, got out, and started dragging my bins off the curb and onto the lawn of a nearby house. She was not gentle about it. She tipped them over, spilling some of the contents, and left them lying in the grass. It was vandalism and illegal dumping, and I had it all on video. I downloaded the footage, made several backup copies, and then called the police. This time, I filed a formal report. The officer who responded watched the video, took my statement, and confirmed that Patricia's actions constituted vandalism. "You want to press charges?" he asked. "Yes, I do." "All right. We will follow up with Mrs. Henderson and issue a citation." Depending on the outcome, this could result in a misdemeanor charge. 2 days later, Patricia Henderson received a citation for criminal mischief. The penalty was a fine of $500 and a court date. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People who had been afraid to speak up suddenly found their courage. More signatures appeared on my petition. Within a week, I had 42 confirmed homeowners demanding a special election. David Chen scheduled the meeting for the first Saturday in June. The turnout was unprecedented. Nearly 200 homeowners showed up, filling the clubhouse to capacity. Patricia Henderson sat at the front table with her 2 bored cronies, looking defiant. The meeting was contentious. Patricia tried to maintain control, insisting that the complaints against her were baseless and motivated by personal vendettas. But when David Chen presented the financial records, showing the payments to Prestige Property Solutions and the lack of proper documentation, the room erupted. "This is a conflict of interest," someone shouted. "You have been stealing from us." Another voice yelled. Patricia tried to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. The vote to remove her from the board was nearly unanimous. Her 2 cronies were also removed, and a new board was elected on the spot. Tom Granger became the president, Sharon Mills became the treasurer, and I was elected as the secretary. The meeting ended with a standing ovation, but the story did not end there. In July, the Ohio Real Estate Commission completed its investigation into the HOA's finances. They found evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and multiple violations of state HOA laws. Patricia Henderson and her husband were both charged with theft and corruption. The case went to trial in October, and both were found guilty. Patricia was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to repay over $100,000 that had been illegally funneled through Prestige Property Solutions. Her husband received a similar sentence. As for Maple Ridge Estates, the new board immediately began making changes. We hired a new management company with a transparent fee structure. We revised the covenants to remove the most egregious and petty rules, including the ridiculous restrictions on trash container placement. We allocated funds for real community improvements, including new playground equipment, updated landscaping, and repairs to the clubhouse. The neighborhood felt different. People were friendlier, more relaxed. The constant fear of arbitrary fines was gone, and for the first time in years, Maple Ridge Estates actually felt like a community. As for me, I got my money back. The new board reviewed all of the fines issued under Patricia Henderson's tenure and refunded any that were unjust or improperly issued. I received a check for over $1,000 along with a formal apology. I framed the check and hung it in my garage, right above the spot where my trash bins used to sit. It was a reminder that sometimes standing up to petty tyranny is worth the effort. And I never had another problem with my trash containers again.